Hello everyone, today I'll be showing you how to create a system such as the one you see in my video of parkour races. We're going to do this in sections, so first we'll create all the actors and widgets we'll need, and then we'll go into the coding part of it, or the blueprint part of it. I'll show you first a demonstration. So if I go here to where it says race 1 and step on it, loading screen appears, countdown, checkpoints appear, and then if I do this one purposely a bit slow, my best time right now is 7:43, but if I then do it again and do it a bit quicker, the time will update. As you can see. The race also will be cancelled if you take too long to complete the race, and also if I started the race but I want to cancel it, I can simply go back to the start, step on, and a failed message will appear. Okay, so first things first, I created a folder inside the content folder to have everything here. We're gonna start with making the checkpoint object and the material for it. So the first thing I did was make the material. If you click 3 and then left click, you'll create a parameter like this. And if you click 1 and then left click, you will create a value. So this is really simple. I chose the color blue and then the intensity of the brightness and plugged it into the emissive color. And here you have in blend mode you need to put masked. Once here we have the exponential, the base reflection fraction, and we add it to the overall opacity. If you change these values, the thickness of the outline will change, so just do it however you want. Once we have the material, we're gonna create a blueprint class of class actor here, and inside this one, it's really simple. I simply added a sphere, put the material we just created on it. I removed the collision from the sphere completely and added a sphere collision. So this is all for now here. Now we're gonna start creating the race start, so the trigger, once the player steps on it, the race will start. So this is more of the same. On components, I just put a simple cube and then a box around it. This one, it's not necessary to take out the collision since the player can step on it perfectly. And we'll use the box to determine the overlapping conditions. So now we have the material, we have the checkpoint, and we have the race start. We'll look at the coding later. Now we're going to create the failed widget, so the message that appears when you don't complete the race. This is really simple. Here you simply put a canvas panel, drag it down here, and then a simple text by typing text. And in this case I put the anchor, so on this part I put it on the top center. Once this is done, we can save and then close. And then we want to go to the completed widget, so this message will appear if the player has done a new best time. Same thing here, we put a canvas panel, then 2 texts. Both are anchored to the center. One simply say best time, and the other one is here will be displayed the time. For now we just leave it like this. I simply wrote here a default text, and then we will create a binding. For now we're gonna leave it like this. Then we're going to create the loading widget, canvas panel, an image, which I anchored to the whole screen, and then simply I changed the color of it. Then we have the loading message and a circular throbber. All of these things you can find here just by typing. Once we have the loading widget, we can go to the countdown. So this is the 3, 2, 1 you see at the beginning of the race. Same thing here, canvas and text. Here we'll also do some functions so that the number changes. The last widget we need to do is the Stopwatch widget, canvas panel, and 3 texts. One says the best time. This will display your best actual time, and this will display the actual time while you're doing the race. Once we have the widgets done, or at least a design of them, we can go back to our third person character template, or the first person, whichever you have done. And the first things we want to do is here on event begin play, we want to create references for the widgets of the countdown widget and stopwatch widget. That way, I forgot this one to put it into the race variables. That way later on we can simply from our third person character reference these widgets. So the countdown widget, which is this one, and the stopwatch widget, which is this one. We also want to make three variables and an enumeration. We'll start with the enumeration. So in your folder, you can right click, type enum, create one of this, name it whatever you want. For mine, I've decided to create 2 races, and then you always need a default value. In this case, I simply named it none, so there's no race selected. You can save this and then close it. And then in your third person, when you click new variable, type whatever you want. Here, you simply choose the enum you created, which in my case, I think it was race list or something. Yeah, here. So this is exactly what I did for this. This one I can delete. Then we want an integer, which will determine the number of checkpoints for each race. So, as you saw before, my first race only has 3 checkpoints. But the second race has 5. So that variable will determine how many checkpoints each race will have. The default value for the race should be none. The default value for number of checkpoints doesn't really matter because you will change it at the beginning of each race. And then we also want to store the best time for the race 1 and best time for the race 2. Well, as many races as you have of these two. The default value for these ones also doesn't really matter. After creating the references and the variables, you should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 plus any other race you want to do. Okay, once we have all the widgets done and the variables created, we can start doing the code. We're gonna start, I think, with the widgets. So the failed widget is a simple message, so we don't need to add anything else here. This one is finished. Then on the completed widget, for this one here, for this text, because we wanted to display the best time, we're gonna have to click here, create a binding. I have already created a binding. And this will create a function here to the left. Before completing this, we have to go back to the event graph. If you don't know how it got here, simply, we're in the designer right now, and if I click here in the graph, it should take you to here. You will have, apart from this one, event pre-construct, or for now you only need event construct. And what we want to do is create a reference to our third person character. Get player pawn, cast to third person character, and then promote this to a variable. Once you have this in the main event graph, we can go back to the functions we created before. So if I click on my text, then create binding. From the third person character reference we created, we can get the other variables we created in the third person character, these ones. So here, so we need to select depending on the race we have selected. If we have race 1, we'll get the best time for race 1. If we have race 2, the best time for race 2. Since this is a whole number that will be stored in seconds, we have to transform that number back into minutes, seconds, and milliseconds. And this is the formula to do so. So you can just copy it or whatever you want. Once we've done the formula, we want to turn all these values into a string. So from here, if you get to text string, and from here an append, which will come by default with 2 pins, and you add as many as you want. In this case we will need 5. One for the minutes, spacer, seconds, spacer, and milliseconds. Once this is done, so in the completed widget, you should have in the event graph a reference to your player, and then the text for your best time. This one will be completed. Then inside the loading widget, there's no code required, so we can finish with this one. We're gonna go to the countdown widget now. Same thing here. We go to the graph. On the event graph, we're gonna have to do a timer, but the first thing we should do is we click the text here, create binding, and it will take us to this. We'll go on the functions. I simply named it getTime. We will create a variable named time with a default value of 3, because the countdown will start from 3. And we'll do a branch. If time is equal or greater than 1, then we want to print it. And we have to turn the time into a text to be able to display it. Once in the event graph, we're going to do 2 custom events. One to start the timer, and the other one is going to be associated to this timer. So we create a custom event, right click, custom event, name it whatever you want. We created set timer by event. We create a set timer by event. Every 1 second, it's going to be looping. So we put 1 and we check the looping. We also want to promote this handle for this timer so we can stop it later on. So once we've created this and we promoted this to a variable, we create the second custom event. And here, we first check if the time is equal to 0. If the time is equal to 0, it means that the timer finished. So we can grab the handle we created, start a timer handle, clear and invalidate timer, so this one stops. And we want to remove the widget, so itself, from the screen. After a delay, we also want to restore the time to its default value of 3. If time is not equal to 0, so 3, 2, or 1, we want to get the time, subtract 1, and then update the time. If the time, then we do a branch and check if the time is equal to 2. If it's not, we want to keep on checking. So this is a loop that will continuously go until time equals 2. Once it's 2, a sound will play. I chose, the sounds here are the defaults that Unreal Engine comes with, so select whichever one you want. I chose the click on button. And we do the same thing here. We get the time and we check if it's equal to 1. If it's false, it will keep on looping. And once it's true, it will play another sound. And with that, we finish the countdown widget. The next thing will be to continue with the stopwatch widget. So best time doesn't change. This one will change. So here the same thing applies. If we go to the graph, first thing we need to do on event construct is get a reference to our player. And here is going to be the exact same thing we did on the completed widget. So we create a binding. In this case, it's this one. And it's the exact same thing. So you can go to the completed widget where we have this, copy it, and paste it here. This one will be a bit more complicated. So we also want to create a binding. I already have it here. And inside your event graph where we've done all this, we want to create variables. We want to create one for the seconds, one for the minutes, and one for the milliseconds. This one we'll create later on when we do another timer. Once you have seconds, minutes, and milliseconds, where the default value for each of them is 0, we can create the binding here. I've already done it, where the minutes will go to a text and then to the append, so the same things we used before. So minutes, seconds, and milliseconds. And the more tedious part starts now. In the same event graph on the stopwatch widget, we're going to have to create also 2 custom events, 3 in total, because this one will stop the timer we create here. So the first custom event will be the start stopwatch. We do a timer, but this time every 0.01 will be looping. We also want to promote this to a variable. So now here we should have the reference to our character, seconds, minutes, and milliseconds, and the timer handle. Again, same thing as before. From here, it goes into our custom event. And the first thing we're going to do is add milliseconds. So every time this loops, it's going to add 1 millisecond. And once the milliseconds equals 100, we're going to reset milliseconds back to 0 and add a second. Once the seconds reach 60, we're going to reset the seconds back to 0 and add a minute. Here we're going to determine the max time for each race. So depending on the race, we want to determine the max number of minutes they have for each race. So since race 1 is pretty short, the max number of minutes is 1. If minutes equal 1, it means they reach the max time, and we reset everything. So we put the race back to none. We stop the stopwatch, which is this custom event we will create now. We add the failed widget, which we created earlier on, to the screen. We add it to viewport, and after a 2-second delay, we remove it from the screen. And we also want to destroy all actors that are the checkpoints. So if the player only removed 2 out of 5, we want to make sure that the other ones are deleted once the race finishes, or destroyed. For the race 2, because it's a bit longer, even though it's more than enough, 1 minute, but I just wanted to make an example, I put 2 minutes instead of 1. This is how you can separate between races to determine the max time for each race. And that would be the timer completed. So we update milliseconds, the seconds, the minutes, and we determine a match time for each race. Then we also need to create a custom event to stop this timer, which we will call in other parts of the components we've made. So first thing we do is clear and invalidate the timer by handle, so what we created here before, and then this will have two parts. So I created a sequence. The first one is that when the race ends, we want to check if the player made a new record. So we do the same thing. From the race, we switch on race list. Here we simply type like that. And the only thing that changes between this part and this part is that the variables, this one is race 1 and this one race 2, race 1 and race 2. So the first things we want to do is we're going to create a macro to turn these variables into 1. So the minutes I turn into seconds, seconds stay as seconds, and the milliseconds turn to seconds also. And that way we get a just one whole number. So we want to compare, is the actual time of the race smaller or equal to the race best time? If this is true, we can continue and we update the best time for the race. We also proceed if the best time is 0, because that's the default value, and that means that the player has not yet participated in the race. So when either of these two conditions are true, we proceed and we update this time. We then want to create a widget, which will be the completed widget. This one with the best time. We add it to the viewport, and after a delay of 3 seconds, or however much time you want, we remove it from the screen. For the second race, it's the same, except these variables change from race 1 to race 2. This is the same macro and everything. The second part of this will be resetting everything. So, the first thing we want to do is to disable the input of the player with a delay of 3 seconds. Then we create a branch and we check if the race is different to none. If the race is different to none, we want to reset the race to none. And regardless of if this is true, we want to reset minutes to 0, seconds to 0, and milliseconds to 0. We also want to remove the stopwatch, so this widget, from the screen. So we remove from parent, and after this delay of 3 seconds, we enable the input for the player again. And this is done. So just to recap, we've finished the stopwatch, we finished the countdown, we finished the loading widget, we finished the complete widget, the failed widget. Okay, now we're gonna do the code for the checkpoint actor. So once we created this, we go into the event graph, and the first thing we want to do is create a reference to the third person character and see if the overlapping actor is the player. If this is true, then we proceed. And every time the player overlaps, we want to destroy the checkpoint and play a sound so the player knows it's been destroyed. Once here, depending on the race, you want to do one thing or another. In this case, it's going to be exactly the same because the races are really similar. But basically, every time you cross one of the checkpoints, this variable which we created in the third person here, number of checkpoints, will be subtracted by 1. And we create a branch, and when the number of checkpoints is equal to 0, it means we finish the race. So we get the stopwatch widget reference we created in the third person character, and we call this function stopwatch, which is the one we just created here, which will register if the new record is below the best time, and it will reset all the other variables. For the race tour, it's exactly the same. We will subtract, this way maybe you can see better, we will subtract 1 from the number of checkpoints. Once it's 0, we determine that the race is over and we have to stop the stopwatch. And finally, here, which is what's going to trigger the race, we have to add all the blueprints. So first things, as before, we want to create a reference to our player, determine that the overlapping actor is indeed the player, and then we can proceed. We want to check if there's not a race already selected. So from the third person character we get the race, and if it's equal to none, we can proceed. And in this case, because this is the race 1 start, we're gonna set this to the race 1. We've also said that the race 1 will have 3 checkpoints. We want to disable the character input, so the player can't move while he's being teleported to the start of the race. We add the loading screen after a short delay. We create a widget, which is going to be the loading screen, and we add it to the viewport. Then we want to spawn the checkpoints. We create a sequence, and we simply from here put spawn actor from class. Here we select the checkpoint, which is what we created before, and we type the location where we want to put it. To determine the location, we can simply go to our map, select our checkpoint actor, place it where we would like him to be placed, and simply copy the coordinates from here in the details panel. Once you do this for every position you want the checkpoint to be, you can simply delete it. And as you can see here, I already applied the different numbers. Once we spawn the checkpoints, we're going to teleport the player to start. We have to set the actor location and rotation to the correct ones. So in my case, I want the player to start from here, facing this way. And we also want to set the control rotation so that the camera is also facing the correct way. After a small delay, we remove the loading screen, which we added here, from the screen, and we can add the countdown widget, so the 3, 2, 1. We add it to the viewport. We play a sound so the player knows it's the countdown is starting, and we start the timer. This timer is the one from the countdown widget. So we go here, we can see this is what we created before. So every second the time will be subtracted by 1, so the countdown will be 3, 2, 1. And back here, once the time equals 0, we've created a branch that will check constantly to see if this is true. When it's true, another sound will play, indicating that it's the start for the player to be able to run. We enable the input back on, and from the third person character, we get the reference to the stopwatch widget. We add it to the viewport, and finally, we start the stopwatch, which is this that we created before, where we'll be adding milliseconds, the seconds, and then the minutes. This is in case there's no race selected. If we go back here and there is a race selected, it means that we want to stop. So we reset this variable, we put to race none, we stop the stopwatch, third person character reference to our widget, and from here we indicate the function we want to play. Then we destroy all the checkpoints since we want to finish the race. And on completed, we create the failed message. So the failed widget we created before. Create a widget, we select the failed, add to viewport, and after a delay of 2 seconds, we remove it from the screen. And I think that's about it. So if everything went correctly, you should now be able to trigger the race, have the timer, and have the best time every time you reduce your time of completion. And that was the tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. I hope everything was clear. Please let me know if anything wasn't, or if you have any questions in the comments. And I'll see you in the next video.